Hi everybody, I'm Ryan. Today we're going to look at the white-blue soldiers deck in Standard, I was about to say Pioneer, Standard, and talk about the sideboarding for the top 10 most popular decks in Standard. So let's jump right into it. The most popular deck in Standard is Grixis Midrange. It just plays a bunch of removal spells, a bunch of really valuable spells, like Invoke Despair, and then like super good creatures. I like having kind of a large sideboard for this matchup because, even if you have an aggressive start, the reality is you're not going to be able to kill them very quickly because all their cards are very, very good, especially once they board against you. So we want resilient threats, and we want things that, really slow them down. So things like Guardian of Benalia, Anointed Peacekeeper is just a great card that slows them down and actually gives you information. Kayla's Reconstruction is this awesome card where, in the late game, you can, rebuild and get some really valuable cards in the battlefield, very, very quickly. And I like Wandering Emperor just as, another pretty good threat. And it's another way that you can take down their big threats because we have to sideboard out Brutal Cathar. The issue with Brutal Cathar is that quite a few of their creatures have enter the battlefield effects, and they have a lot of removal. So Brutal Cathar can actually end up helping them, which we hate. We're sideboarding out in the trenches. The thing about in the trenches is, in the deep late game, yeah, I can remove a Shieldred or something like that. But you're probably not going to have a ton of creatures because, like I said, they're removing these creatures. We're bringing out the Yodian Frontliner because it very often is just a 1/1 is not very good if you don't have any other creatures, and I don't think you can count on having other creatures that often in this matchup, even though it has Unearth. I'm bringing out one Resolute Reinforcements. Resolute Reinforcements is pretty okay because it's 2 bodies in 1. It being 2 bodies means you can Harbin more easily, means you can Sky Strike Offer more easily, but they're also just 1/1s, and so they don't actually affect the board that much. So this is your sideboard against Grixis. And I'm actually going to cheat a little bit here because this is also your sideboard against Rakdos Midrange, which is the 7th most popular deck, and is also going to be your sideboard against the mono-black midrange, mono-black aggro deck as well. Again, because for a lot of the same reasons, right? The only creatures they play are just really valuable and really strong. They have a lot of removal, so you're probably not going to beat them in the aggro matchup. So you just need to put on a lot of pressure and be able to have a good late game. So that is, again, for Grixis midrange, mono black midrange, and for Rakdos midrange. And I guess Jund midrange as well, especially since Jund midrange is the 10th most popular deck. So I guess let's rewind a little bit, right? Grixis midrange, mono black midrange, Rakdos midrange, and Jund midrange. This is your sideboard. This is the black midrange sideboard. There's a couple versions of midrange that are going to be adding cards to this sideboard, actually, which is what we're going to jump into right now. Against Mardu midrange and Esper midrange, they're a little special because they have pretty valuable enchantments that you want to be able to get rid of. So in things like Wedding Announcement and in things like Fable of the Mirror Breaker and stuff like that, if you see Wedding Announcement and Fable of the Mirror Breaker, right, like in Mardu midrange or Esper midrange, you're seeing them cast things like that 3-mana enchantment that exiles everything that costs 2 or less or whatever. We want to bring in Lauren of the Third Path. So against the mid-range Esper deck, which is the 2nd most popular deck in the format, and against the Mardu mid-range deck, which is the 8th most popular deck in the format, we also want to bring in Lauren, and we're just going to take out the rest of the Resolute Reinforcements. Again, a lot, because the matchups end up playing out the same, so we want a lot of these other players in the matchup, but also Lauren can get rid of a lot of these really important things, right? In both of these matchups, that 3-mana enchantment that exiles everything that costs 2 or less, also it hits Fable of the Mirror Breaker. It's pretty solid. So again, this is for the mid-range Esper deck and for the Mardu mid-range deck. Hello, Misha! The thing that MTG Goldfish hasn't caught up with yet is that there are 2 Esper mid-range decks. There's one that's more traditional removal spells and good stuff, but there's also an Esper Legends deck that is being played where it is 29 lands, plays all of the spell lands, and also plays the creatures. That are just all legends, and they're able to protect their legends with the Legends land. I forgot what it's called, Plaza of Heroes, and it's just super good and super powerful. So what we want to sideboard against that deck is Brutal Cathar is actually pretty good, in getting rid of their very, very, very powerful threats. I also like Guardian of Benalia, mostly because you need to be able to attack through their threats. A lot of their legends have really big butts, and still keeping up the aggro through cards like Rafine and stuff like that is really powerful. And also the deck is pretty mana intensive, so things like Anointed Peacekeeper can stop that really important threat from actually ever hitting the battlefield. We hate things like Thalia, because Thalia doesn't actually slow our opponent down. In fact, it'll end up slowing us down a tiny bit within the trenches. And we're shaving 3 of the frontliner. I think frontliner is just the worst card in the deck, especially when you have a bunch of first strikers and a bunch of like 1/4s and stuff like that, which you're playing against, or like things like Denick and whatever. Like frontliner just doesn't do anything. You just can't attack into it. However, again, like a 1-drop to make Harbin better. Often you're going to be beating this deck with Harbin. So this is your Esper Legends sideboard. Mono Blue Tempo is still around. Mono Blue Tempo is still actually pretty powerful. I like Brutal Cathar against the deck because Brutal Cathar, like, they don't have any hard removal, and being able to remove their very few threats, I think, is very important. I like Wandering Emperor because if we're able to play at instant speed alongside this Mono Blue Tempo deck, they have a hard time keeping up with that. And Anointed Peacekeeper is also, again, very powerful against the Mono Blue deck because, like, they don't play a lot of lands. They really count on their spells not costing a lot. And if you can just, like, Peacekeeper a Thirst for Discovery or something like that, or, you know, an Essence Scatter or a Spell Pierce, that can really put them on the back foot very, very quickly. Especially since it's not a trigger and you get to, like, name it as a part of the spell resolving, which is awesome. Our really plan against this is just going to be to swarm them. We just need to kill them as fast as possible. And to that note, I don't actually like Skystrike Officer very much in the matchup, mostly because, like, we don't care about just, like, drawing cards in the late game. Like, the only way they, like, actually interact with us is returning stuff to our hand, which is really bad if something is a lot of mana, or it being countered, which is also really bad if something is a lot of mana. And we're bringing up our curve quite a bit already with the cards we're bringing in, and I don't want to play that game. And I actually like shaving on Siege Veteran. Siege Veteran is really good because you can put +1/+1 counters on stuff, but we're rarely going to be trying to attack through, you know, a blocker. You know, if they tap out for Hadigen on 3, like, that's great for us. Or if they are at a point where they can play Tolarian Terror, like, we're probably just trying to go wide, you know, and we're all okay with that. So we just, like, shave on our expensive stuff, bring in some better expensive stuff and more disruptive expensive stuff, and that's where we want to be. Mono Black Midrange is the 4th most popular deck. We already talked about it as the first thing we did. Grixis Sacrifices, or I call it like Grixis Artifacts, is a really interesting matchup. So again, we're bringing in Anointed Peacekeeper, mostly for things like Oni Cult Anvil, or Misha's Research Desk, or Reckoner Bankbuster. There's a lot of activated abilities, so we actually get a lot of extra value off of Anointed Peacekeeper. I love Lauren of the Third Path. They have a lot of important artifacts and important enchantments that are super important for the deck, and so playing it as a Reclamation Sage is very powerful. And otherwise, I really want to just remain like a super hyper aggressive aggro deck. This is basically like a gimmicky mid range deck that does a lot of combo-y stuff, but it's definitely sacrificing on the mid range power of the deck. But because it still plays a lot of removal spells, I don't really like Brutal Cathar in the matchup. I think the reality of in the trenches is we're rarely going to be able to go wide enough. However, I think Frontliner is actually pretty good because they are going to have a lot harder time blocking than the normal like Grixis mid-range deck. And so we're just going to shave on Resolute Reinforcements. Rakdos Sacrifice plays out very similarly. They're actually just like only splashing for a few cards with the Grixis Sacrifice deck. So Rakdos Sacrifice is the 6th most popular deck, but we're going to sideboarding the same. It doesn't actually change anything for us. We treat it like it's the same deck. We already talked about Rakdos Midrange, which is the 7th most popular deck. We sideboard the same as Grixis Midrange and Mono Black Midrange. We already talked about Mardu Midrange, which is the same thing as the Esper Midrange deck. You're going to sideboard the same. Mono White Midrange is a little different, though. So Mono White Midrange is like kind of an Angels deck, kind of just a Mono White good stuff, kind of a Mono White control deck, a Wedding Announcement deck. So we're going to be siding in our Laurens. They have a bunch of enchantments that are very, very good against us. We're going to be sided in our Wandering Emperor. They play some board wipes, and we don't want to just die to the board wipes. We're going to bring in our Kayla's Reconstruction, because, again, they're very much a slower, big mana, board wipey, but also they have Creatures deck, and it's super annoying. And I actually like the Anointed Peacekeeper, so we can slow down things like Farewell and stuff like that, that will just, like, you know, close the door on us. Because they play board wipes and a lot of removal, I don't like Brutal Cathar, even though it's also a creature deck. It really sucks to bring up Brutal Cathar, but it is what it is. In the trenches, often we end up 2-for-1ing ourselves with things like Farewell, and it just, like, it ends up being, like, a really bad situation for us within the trenches, where they're removing stuff, or it doesn't quite make things big enough, and it's just not good enough. I actually like Frontliner because often it can attack through a lot of things, and we want to remain very aggressive against this deck. I do like shaving on Athalia because most of their cards are creatures. The cards that we really care about are enchantments. But I think it's tough to be, sacrificing like a 4 of legend needs to be insane if you're playing it in the deck, I really feel like. And because we're cutting our in the trenches, I'm also going to cut our resolute reinforcements and just 1 Yodian frontliner. They're the best. They're the worst cards in the deck. And like really the Harbin Dream is a lot less prevalent in a deck that has a lot of flyers. We're just trying to be just like, I guess, strong, aggressive deck with a solid late game where we don't just die to things like Farewell. And we already talked about Jund mid-range. For Jund mid-range, we are sideboarding the same as Grixis and Rakdos and all of that stuff. So that was a little weird. Things are a little less complicated in standard. I guess we sideboard the same in quite a few matchups and against decks that are pretty similar. But that is blue-white or white-blue, whatever you want to call us, soldiers. The sideboard guide. If you enjoyed that video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias. Links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.